Right. We'll go ahead and begin. So welcome everybody to the MSR Flamekeepers webinar. Today's date is February 19th, 2024. And we're really glad to have you with us. Please put in the chat where you're calling in from. Thank you. And I will share the PowerPoint. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, everyone. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you here. There we go. That's what I want to share. Let me know if you can see the PowerPoint, like a thumbs up if you can see it. All right, great. Okay, so the topic today is movement building. And we have a special guest with us that I'm so delighted about, and that is Deborah Runlett, who is as passionate about movement building as I am, and she knows a whole lot more than I do, actually. I'm a learner and sit at her feet, and so I've invited her to join with us today to help our conversation and also to begin, whoops, and I'm not being able to move this screen, and to begin with an opening contemplation. I'm going to stop sharing. So Debbie is, or Deborah, you can call her either one. Deborah Runlett is one of the founding stewards of the Global Consciousness Institute that Chris and I are also a part of, and is also a certified Edgewalker facilitator in Edgewalkers International. We have several people here who are part of Edgewalkers, including Peggy and Lisa. And so welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Catherine. And she is the founder of Poets and Prophets. Is it poetsandprophets.com?
No, .org. There is a .com, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So please check out her website because she is doing beautiful work on spirituality and leadership and helping people in different walks of life, particularly religious faith, spirituality-based walks of life to be better leaders, and then helping other leaders, like in the government now, one of the areas she's working with, helping leaders to bring more consciousness to the work that they do. So Debbie, I'm going to invite you to begin our time with an opening contemplation. And thank you for agreeing to my invitation to do that.
Oh, I'm thrilled to do it. And I thought, given the fact that we're looking at movement building, a place to begin actually might be with ourselves. And we all know this, but I think it bears remembering that we cannot give what we do not have. And as we come into this Zoom room from all sorts of different places doing different things, I want to call us inward to our core. And in that center, to settle ourselves into stillness, that we might connect with Source. But first, I want to get us somewhat embodied, and I'm going to invite us to actually engage with the Anjali Mudra, which I think all of you know. It's simply hands at heart. But the mudra is for union, and it actually means an offering. It's a symbol of bringing separate pieces together into an expression of union or oneness. It's a way to balance right and left brain, and as well as the solar and lunar energies in our bodies. And when we balance these dualities, we enter into a state where our mind becomes more steady. So again, I'm going to ask you to bring your hands together, but not smush them. Have a little bit of opening there to guide your palms, and that symbol of space provides space for the teachings that Judy's going to give us today. And with that, I invite you to take a deep breath in and release, retaining hands at chest. And as you do so, I invite you to close your eyes or to get that soft gaze and to be still and know that Source abides within you. To be still and know. to be still and be. And out of the stillness, may we bow to one another in gratitude. And may grace enfold you, peace envelop you, and love embrace you in this time we share together. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much.
Mm.
Perfect.
Back to you, Judi.
Right, and back to the agenda. So we began with an opening contemplation, which is something that we practice in almost all of our MSR meetings as a way to come together and to honor the connection that's always there, and the connection to source, to something greater than ourselves. And today, what we'll be talking about is the big question around movement building, which I'll give you in a minute. And Debbie and I will share some models of movement building for our consideration. And then we'll have some discussion questions that are offered as guidance, but we'll go wherever the conversation wants to take us. So to give you a background on the Big Question webinars, this is something that Jerry Bieberman, who is with us today, this is an idea that Jerry had in the Flamekeeper committee. And the Flamekeeper committee is made up of basically the elders of the MSR group, the Management, Spirituality, and Religion group, where our charter is to honor the founding values of MSR and to keep the flame or the spirit alive, to nurture the soul of MSR. And as elders, many of us have served on the executive committee or in various leadership roles in MSR. And we, as we kind of step back from those roles, we realize that most of the meetings in MSR are focused on preparation for the conference or for other MSR events, and having to look at things that are happening next month or things that happen in August when the Academy of Management conference is run. And that the role of elders or wisdom keepers in any culture in any society is to step back and look at the bigger questions, the bigger picture that you can go more deeply into, rather than get caught up in the minutia of the things, the tasks that have to be done on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And so that's where the MSR Big Question seminars our webinars came from, was each of us who are part of the Flamekeepers, and that's Chris Laszlo and Jerry Bieberman and Ornita Burton and Catherine Goldman, Schuyler, and several others who are not with us right now. For us to each share what we think are the deeper questions that we as a community can look into. And so this is the question that's burning for me, is around, is MSR, or the field of workplace spirituality or conscious leadership or organizational transformation, is this a movement? And if so, what does it mean to be a movement? And as we look at this greater purpose of why we've come together collectively, what are we currently doing that works to build this movement? And what more could we do to expand our field? So that's kind of the underlying question, right? And so the models that we're going to present are these 4 models, and there's many more, but we don't want to spend 2 days doing this. Actually, that would be kind of fun to do, but we're going to focus on these 4 models kind of as to seed the conversation. The first one is John Paul Lederach's critical yeast theory, which comes from a chapter in his book that Debbie introduced to me, and the book is called The Moral Imagination. Then we have Meg Wheatley and Deborah Freese's Emergence and in Social Innovation Model. And I've got to make sure I can see what I'm seeing. And then there's the Anya Institute's Social Movement Ecology. And finally, Sandra Waddock's Model in Catalyzing Transformation, her brand new book. So the first model that we want to present this is the critical mass versus critical yeast concept. Generally, when anyone talks about social change, creating and building a movement, they say, we just need to get critical mass. And most of the social science says, oh, 10 to 15% of whatever population you look at, if they really see and get committed to the new vision, the new paradigm, and change their behavior in alignment with that, then there will be a shift in the whole population. And that actually, for something like workplace spirituality, conscious leadership, organizational transformation, these kinds of concepts, that's a huge amount of the population if you think of all those who work in or are affected by organizations. And the brilliance of John Paul Lederach is he says it does not take that high a percentage of the population. And what Debbie presented to a group that we were in that she founded in Pivot Projects and an interdisciplinary team is that this idea of critical yeast comes from a bread baking metaphor. And I'm going to ask you in a minute to add to what I'm saying, Debbie, but I just love, first of all, that this is more of a feminine model. I mean, I know men bake bread too, but we typically associate bread baking with female activity. And there's something gentle and generative about bread baking versus sort of the marketing that it would take to reach 10 to 15% of the population. So to go into the metaphor, when you think of all the ingredients that go into bread, there's flour and there's flavorings and there might be sugar or honey. The tiniest amount is the yeast. It is the smallest ingredient in bread baking. There's so much more flour and there's so much more of all the other ingredients. But the yeast is the life-giving aspect of what makes the bread grow and expand into something that's delicious and wonderful and nurturing. And when you begin to bake bread, the first thing you do is put the yeast in warm water and you put it in a dark place. And if you think about movements and think about even the early days of MSR, there were a handful of us, Jerry Bieberman being one of the co-founders of MSR. There were just a few of us, and we were kind of like that yeast in warm water. We were sort of insulated and protected and below the radar, and nobody quite knew who we were or what we were doing. And when something is new and emerging like that, it needs to be protected and cared for. And then within the bread baking process, when the yeast has started to grow and develop, you then mix it in to the mainstream, to the flour, to the other ingredients, and knead it, and it gets challenged, but it gets spread more throughout the system, and eventually is baked and then nurtures people. And John Paul Lederich says that the critical yeast is a few strategically connected people, and that they have a greater potential for creating social growth of an idea or a process than large numbers of people who think alike. So there's, I liken it to Jim Collins, who talked about getting the right people on the bus. And so it doesn't have to be huge numbers of people. It's more like Margaret Mead talking about a group of thoughtful, committed citizens are the ones who make a difference. And so Debbie, what would you add to what I've said?
I guess the only thing I would add, Judi, is that it involves all the stakeholders. And so John Paul Lederich is a peacemaker, and it is often the least expected people, like the women, wives of the tribal warriors, who bring the people together, and that it isn't like-minded. So it's bringing together, just as in bread we bring together different ingredients, it's bringing together these different people in order to work toward the flourishing of the whole. But it often is that littlest ingredient that's overlooked by many, and those individuals who aren't thought to have significant voices.
Thank you. Last night, a friend recommended that I watch a movie, which I watched last night, and the name of that movie is Pray the Devil to Hell. And it is about the Liberian women coming together in the Liberian Civil War to make the men stop fighting. They actually had a sex strike. They wore all white and lined the roads that the president of Liberia would drive on to show their solidarity. And the two leaders of the movement were a Christian woman and a Muslim woman. And so they came together to wake the men up, so to say, we're tired of the violence, we're tired of the hunger for the children and so on. And they stopped the Civil War. And so that's a beautiful example of what you're saying, is these two women were the critical yeast. The fact that they created that partnership allowed others to come together in solidarity.
Judi, there's one other thing I would say, as you were talking about the kneading, that building of resilience that comes, and if you thought from an exercise perspective of stress and renewal, I think it's really important that we understand it's going to be stressful. And that's what's going to build the resilience. We're going to be punched down at different moments and challenged. And within that punching down and challenging, we actually rise again.
Yeah. 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 That's where our strength comes from, is that challenge. Yeah. Thank you. So a couple more people are joining us. So welcome, welcome. All right. So that's the first model, the critical mass versus critical yeast. And so I want to go on to model 2, which is the model of emergence and social innovation from Meg Wheatley and Deborah Fries. And this will be more of a visual explanation of the model that comes directly from their article, which you can find online. And they talk about the first phase of building a movement is networks connecting with one another and finding what is their shared meaning, purpose, what are the visions that they share. And people connect with others and with other networks for self-benefit. So MSR might connect with social issues in management at the Academy of Management to increase our membership, to do something that benefits our group within the Academy of Management. But there is a sense that there is some shared meaning and purpose. Stage 2 is the creation of communities of practice, working together on something that they're developing new practices together, new ways of being. And the purpose is to develop new practices together, new knowledge, new systems. And so there's a greater sense of interconnection and learning together. And this might be, for instance, if MSR were to connect to the Conscious Leadership Guild, which is a group of people that include business leaders, consultants, and academics who are looking particularly at conscious leadership, or connecting to conscious capitalism, or connecting to at one point, the MSR connected to the research methods group within the Academy of Management to look at what might be more conscious research methods if you were going to have a more spiritually informed or connected to source form of leadership. What might that be? And so we develop programs together. So that would be an example of that. And then level 3 is where you create systems of influence, getting involved in the government or in the decision-making institutions, so that these new practices, these new models, these new paradigms become the norm. And so Chris, for instance, might be able to speak to this in terms of his understanding of history of sustainability, where at one point sustainability was like St. John being not St. John, but John the Baptist being in the forest, the voice calling out in the wilderness, and hardly anybody knowing about that. Whereas now there's, in the US government and in many other governments, there are sustainability initiatives, and Chris, hopefully someday flourishing initiatives, initiatives around planetary and human flourishing. So those are the 3 levels of development of a movement. And so, Chris, since I just mentioned you, is it anything you'd like to say about your own experience going through with sustainability and ESG, and as it's moved through these stages?
In the context of this webinar, and this being an MSR webinar, the one observation I have is that as that field matured, and it became something that was more accepted worldwide, and more people participated in it, it moved from I would say, a more external type of initiative to one that affected more our inner lives, the inner lives of people who were part of it. And so as it became more mature, I don't know if it has to do with the nature of that particular community of practice around sustainability and flourishing, or whether it has to do with all communities of practice. As they mature, they require a more attention to one's inner life.
Mm.
And in particular to being connected, not just in some sort of the historic way we think about communication using a telephone or even a computer, whatever, but connected through energy, and feeling deeply connected to your own purpose, and feeling more deeply connected to nature as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's a profound level of evolution. I know sometimes in MSR and in the Global Consciousness Institute, we talk about the field, meaning the energetic field or the quantum field that organizes ideas and people and resources. And it takes a shift in consciousness to sense that and amplify it. Yeah, thank you. So Debbie, what would you add to this model of movement building and emergence and social innovation?
Well, I think 2 things. One is that it pulls from Megan Deborah's 2 loops model. And in that two loops model, these are people who have walked out of the system, who have said, it's not working, even when the system appears to still be working. And then they drop down into that co-creative space. And what's interesting to me is the impact of their work on the Presencing Institute in terms of Theory U. So you can see, how this work then begins to get moved out. But one of the things that Deborah talks about that I think is really important is the terroir of the place. And so even as the movement has its patterns, if you will, and its stages, it also takes in the importance of local. So as we look at global consciousness, it also doesn't try to create a melting pot, but looks to the particulars of the context and honors that.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, the unity and diversity and diversity and the unity. Yeah, thank you. So Debbie, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on discussing social movement ecology, which I'll share that slide in a minute.
And as Judy's doing that, how many of you are familiar with the Anye Institute, which was founded in 2016 and located in Boston?
I am because of you.
All right. Well, this is fun. So first of all, the word Anye means today for you, tomorrow for me. And this comes out of Inca roots, and it was practiced in Inca times and continues to be important in the Andean culture. And it looks at all sorts of forms of reciprocity and involves relationships not only with human beings, but with Mother Earth, Pachamama. And so when the Institute was formed, they drew from movement ecology. So here we see this aspect of interdisciplinary partnership. And I quote, "We use the metaphor of ecology to explain how many different organisms with sometimes competing interests can be in relationship with each other to maintain the health, diversity, and sustainability of the whole environment. We think we can create intentional and synergistic relationships between different approaches to social change to build a resilient movement of ecology." So the Anye Institute serves as an incubator. But what they have come to understand is that often organizations tend to work through one theory of change. And what they understand, and they look through three in particular, is that obviously, as Judy's walking us through today, there are multiple theories of change. And we have to be sensitive to the contextual needs and to the ask of the organization or the purpose of the organization. And often conflict emerges when people come together and they share a passion or they see a shared need, but they're operating out of different theories of change. And so they see this movement, if you will, a movement ecology that looks at multiple ways to system change. And they understand that all are needful. So there is personal transformation. And as I started at the beginning, we can't give what we don't have. And we have to be attentive to the reality that we are always going to be in this place of transformation. And some moments will be more comfortable than others. Then there is the creation. Judi talked about the yeast coming out of John Paul Lederach's critical yeast theory. That we need those safe spaces in which to test out new ideas or to become more fully ourselves, because it's not about changing who we are, but becoming the people that we were created to be. And out of that movement of personal transformation, so you think about the complexity of this at the level of self, moving into the level of alternative community, we then begin to build the strength and capacity for changing dominant systems. And so while they will recognize and do indeed more theories of change than this simple pattern, they do see most of them fitting in with these three. And so one of the things that you would be asked if you were to go to a movement ecology gathering is, which theory of change do you spend your most time working on? And what role of each theory of change plays into the movement, in this case, of MSR? And how then do we flex a little bit and relate and support other foundational theories of change, that we might build this culture of interdependence, and embrace a multi-strategic movement. So in terms of my own work, it tends to focus on personal transformation and the creation of brave spaces in which to be, become, and belong and become. And out of that, equip people for changing the dominant systems. But I don't tend to be the one out there working with the dominant systems. My work tends to be on the ground or in the classroom with personal transformation and alternatives. So it's interesting to think about, where and in what context we do our work, and then how do we partner with others in it. Judi, you've heard me talk about this from a variety of perspectives. Is there anything else you want to add?
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like do from an application point of view, from in MSR, the faculty who are looking at curriculum development and how to reach students about their own faith, their own spirituality, and how they might apply that in their lives, that would be a focus on personal transformation. And the alternatives, in one sense, MSR began as an alternative community. It was an alternative to the mainstream quantitative paradigm that focuses primarily on profit in organizations and how to increase the dominant organizations in their effectiveness. We became the alternative that began our meetings with poetry or song or readings from the spiritual texts. We acted differently, and we had retreats, and we did things different from the mainstream. And then as we've matured, we've had an impact on the culture of the overall academy. There's actually Toyoko Sato is I think we had done some research on the themes of every year's Academy of Management since MSR began, and something like 30 or 40% of the conference themes had some connection to spirituality. And that never had been the way it was before. So MSR goes from being an alternative community to then having an impact on the overall dominant institution. And then probably within MSR, there may be many people who see some of us like founders as the old guard, and there might be some people who are creating an alternative community within MSR that just would challenge the prevailing paradigm of MSR. So it's this iterative, is that how you say that word? Kind of process that that actually goes back to that emergence in social innovation as we dance through these different aspects. But I think the main thing you've taught me about this model is one of these places is more home to us than others. Yeah. And then I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, and I was going to say, and typically we all get a chance to move through all of them, but then want to go back to our home base. So I think about Parker Palmer, who started out with changing dominant institutions and was beaten up like no tomorrow, moving into that alternative space, Quaker space, that allowed for the personal transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's multi-directional is what you're saying as well. Yeah. I also think of somebody like Julia Storberg Walker, who's the chair of MSR this year, and her passion is changing the dominant paradigm in business schools and looking at a deeper, more holistic form of education. And then Sai, you are also challenging some dominant institutions within India and within the Vedanta teachings of how to integrate that into, instead of business being over here and being materialistic and the Vedanta being going into the cave and meditating, you're challenging that dominant separation into an integration of how the spirituality interweaves with leadership. Sai, would you like to say a little bit about what you're doing, just and also like introduce yourself to this community? And let me stop sharing for a minute.
Yeah, namaste, everybody. I represent what's called Institute of Indic Wisdom, and it's an inclusive term. So Indic Wisdom means, apart from Vedanta, we are looking at Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism, so which are what we call the dharmic religions or dharmic philosophies. So that's what we channel to the management and leadership development space. So our work is at present fully focused on inner transformation, and that's the core part of our work. In fact, we are four co-founders of this institute. A couple of them, Judi, and some of you here may be quite familiar with Prasad Kaipa from the US, and we have one Mr. Harikiran Vadlamani from Singapore, who is also involved. And in fact, the challenge is because we are in various stages of our own inner coherence and inner peace and inner harmony. So when we are attempting this inner transformation, it gets played out within our own operational reality also. That's one part of this stuff. Second is that we have brought down some of these, ideas and some of these metaphors to a more relatable kind of thing. For example, initially we talked about yogic presence as the North Star for a leader to become conscious. So then, after a lot of consultations with practicing leaders, coaches, and all that, we termed it as inner presence, because yogic presence is like a true North Star, So then it becomes almost, non-reachable, or it takes about, let's say, a decade to go there, kind of stuff. So obviously that kind of time is not available for leaders and CEOs and all that. So we talk about inner presence, and so that's one part of the work which we, of course, that's the toughest part of the work. But some of the other applications of conscious leadership and other things, we are able to have more conversations. That's where we are. And parallelly, some other movement is also coming alive. There is something called United Council for Ancient Wisdom is just got seeded, say a couple of months ago. We are going to have the first meeting in another, like this Friday, India time. So IIW, so I went there and presented our model of inner presence, as well as what we call the human field theory. And there is a lot of resonance, and we are hopeful that, as you said, some alternative we are providing. And of course, we are talking about personal transformation also. So hopefully it will take on some of the predominant institutional dominant players as we go by. As Debbie said, it will be a tough call. But anyway, we are aware of that, and we are keeping our fingers crossed and see what comes, what emerges. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We wish you so many blessings on this work. Julia Storberg Walker and I and Debbie for a little while were part of the Inner Awakening program that you and others were co-leading, and I know it to be extremely accessible work and also deeply profound. And so we honor you for what you're doing, and in the hopes that we're co-creating a movement of consciousness around leadership and our interconnections and the inner and the outer. Chris talked about how the inner presence and the inner being is so important to the sustainability movement as an example. So thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the last model and then our questions. Oh, and welcome, Sunny. So this last model is the newest one that I've come across. And actually, Chris Laszlo introduced this model to me from a shared colleague and friend, Sandra Waddick, who's done some very profound work at the Academy of Management around transformation and around spiritual approaches to organizational change and change in the field of academia. So she has written a book that just came out called Catalyzing Transformation. And she has, the model is more complex than what I've presented here, but I tried to pull out sort of the key elements of this phase. These are phases of the model. And she talks about in the first stage of creating a transformational movement that really is catalytical. It changes, it completely changes form. We often use the butterfly metaphor that the butterfly can't go back into the chrysalis. So something has catalyzed the transformation and it raises to a new level of evolution, of maturity, of complexity. And so the first stage is the stage of connecting. And that means building strong alliances, like Sai being on this call with, that's an MSR call, but Sai being a part of the Indic Academy. And then Peggy, for example, among other things, is a part of the Edgewalkers International community that I've developed. And, you know, so each of you has your other connections and alliances and community. And so as the movement begins, individuals and organizations start to build alliances with one another. And that's very similar to what Meg Wheatley and Deborah Fries talk about. And so you begin connecting initiatives and people. And it starts with outreach and as Debbie and I were co-creating the mapping the terrain kind of project of who's out there, what are they doing, how can we build relationships and connections. The second stage, Sandra calls cohering. And that's a beautiful energetic term and also a quantum physics term where the energy becomes much more aligned and intertwined. So these people and organizations share their vision and they share their knowledge and they begin to create new knowledge together. And that's like the communities of practice that was again in the Wheatley and Fries model. And then my favorite part of this model is the third phase called amplifying, where each organization and the individuals begin to amplify each other's work and amplify and spread their shared work. So if, for instance, Sai were to send me information about the next inner awakening inner presence, I'm sorry, Sai, the Awakening Inner Presence program, if he were to send that to me and I send that out to the MSR group, I send it out to the Global Consciousness Institute, and I send it out to Edgewalkers International, and 75 people sign up for his program, and then they go become teachers of that program, then that's amplifying the work that the Indic Academy is doing. And Peggy, your work on democracy, Unite for Democracy, really is using this amplifying model of together implementing action plans, looking at the key leverage points in the system and how you work on it. So would you share a little bit, you know, as I've defined this, does this resonate for you?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely resonates for sure. Yeah. So we've been, well, yeah, the whole idea from the beginning was how do we reach millions and millions of people? And you thinking of amplification, you know, like if 10 people came to a meeting and we invited people to invite 10 people themselves to the next meeting, and even if only 5 people came, it only takes 9 iterations of that to get to close to 4 million people. So it definitely that way of thinking of continuing to invite people definitely is amplifying. And then the other piece, another piece about connecting. So thinking about what other organizations are doing similar work. How do we connect, network, share our information with them, their information with us? So definitely it's all resonating quite a bit.
Yeah, it seems to be what you're about. So,
Right.
so I've asked you about the process, but so since I've given you the floor for a minute, would you say a little bit to others as an invitation if they wanted to get involved? What are you doing and how would they get involved?
Oh, well, thank you. So I started a nonprofit a couple of months ago, Unite for Democracy, because I'm very, very concerned about democracy. And so I think there are two issues: educating everybody about the difference between democracy and dictatorship, educating everybody about the difference, so that everybody is motivated to vote. And then second, to get to the root of the issues, because if all we do is vote in the fall so that a democracy is retained, we still have the root issues and the root causes that has this stirring. And so creating some models and ways of being with people and bringing people together, where we're working with people at the root level of how do we want to live in this country. And so it'll be interesting how all this evolves, because it's definitely brand new. But anyway, so we have gathering spaces where we'll be doing that, of inventing how we want to live together, how we're going to do that. So if you want to get involved, we have a lovely, I think it's pretty lovely, beginning event called Democracy is Us, which that's actually a way to think about democracy. That's not a thing, it's not an institution, it's not out there, it's me. Who I am in relationship to democracy is going to determine what democracy is. So it's Democracy is Us, reshaping democracy for a bright America. And so we're holding them regularly. The next one is Wednesday evening in the United States, and then the next one is Saturday morning in the United States. So they're ongoing. And so I'll put my email in the and is that the way I should do that, Judy? Put my email address
That's
in the
perfect.
chat. And so if you want to find out more, please get in touch, because we are reaching out to millions and millions and millions of people between now and October. So would love for everybody to learn more about what we're up to. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like this is a way to amplify your work, and very happy to do that. It's like everyone on this call is doing amazing work. And so as we're in a moment, we'll move into the discussion part of our day. And so if anything that you can share about your own work that others can help amplify, please feel free to do that. You know, so often on these kinds of calls, we're not supposed to market ourselves, but this is the opposite. It's like, let people know who you are and what you're up to and how they might join with you. So consider that an invitation. So Chris, I'm going to ask you, since you're the one who introduced me to Sandra Waddock's Catalyzing Transformation, is there anything you would add? I know this only covers a small portion of the book. Oh, and actually Catherine might also have something to add to this, because she's familiar with Sandra's work. But Chris first, and then Catherine, if you want.
Well, do we want to have Lisa go and
Yes,
then
we
I'll
do.
go?
You're right. I'm sorry. Yes, let's do that.
Okay. I can't get the motto out of my head, Deborah, that you shared. And just a quick question. So it was, I drew it on a Post-it. It was the personal transformation, the changing dominant institution, and then alternatives. And I was wondering, was there space for hybrids within that?
Oh, absolutely.
And if there's any research or anything around the hybrids between.
Yeah, and I don't know that they would use the word hybrid, but they would acknowledge that some organizations and academies and schools and whatnot move across two, but very rarely do they move across all three, because it's hard. I mean, it's just really hard. But sometimes that alternative community is, I mean, look at what Peggy's just named is created around one or two aspects of it and grows from there.
Okay.
And it
Thank you.
takes intention. Yeah, but you know what? You should call over, Lisa. You would love talking with them over there.
You know, I love everything. I don't have.
And
I'm
we
all a
love
buzz
you.
now. Okay. Thank you, Chris, for letting me ask my question.
Sure. So now to elaborate a bit on Sandra Waddock's work, her most recent work, I should say, she's so prolific, her focus right now is on what she calls polycrises, which are complex, interrelated global crises. And the idea is that most approaches that are aimed at solving these are too piecemeal, too incremental, too focused on change. Judi, as you point out, the difference between change and transformation. But I think it also gets to, we many of us grew up with this distinction, right, between what's complicated and what's complex. Peter Senge in 1990 first made some very interesting distinctions about that. But what more recently, people like Otto Scharmer and Kaufer and others have started to distinguish between different types of complexity.
Right.
And any attempts to provide meaningful solutions to polycrises require a different approach, one that Sandra Waddock calls system-wide transformation. And these elements that Judi were describing are part of an effort to get change agents to catalyze. She's really big on this notion of catalysis, that no individual or even group or institution can tackle these big global problems such as climate change or social inequality, biodiversity loss, and so on, or the backsliding Peggy of democracy. But what we can do, perhaps, is try to be catalysts for a system-wide transformation. And I think that's such a compelling idea, that we need to now be looking at beyond. We need to be much more aware than we have in the past about the difference between doing less harm and making a small incremental change, and then something that is really moving the needle on these big social and global problems, which is what Sandra's interested in.
Thank you, Chris. And Catherine, did you want to say something? You put in the chat something about Sandra's work with Erica Steckler on personal practices, and Chris has also that's very much a part of your emphasis, Chris, on that centrality of personal practices, and MSR we also look at collective practices. But Catherine, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So if I look kind of at the long term of Sandra's work, she and Erica, and it was, I'm pretty sure, in 2009. So that was early-ish. It wasn't the beginning of MSR, but it was still early compared to, now. We're speaking in a session with Peter Senge on complexity and systems change, and that's where they first brought up this new way of looking at practice in an integrated way. So when that was when she was studying the people who had created the social responsibility movement. And what they found in looking at a whole lot of interviews with the main people who had created that was when they were looking for meditation, they didn't find anything. But when they looked for ongoing personal awareness practice, everybody had one. And so I think this focus on awareness practice rather than a specific practice is really, really important. And it's one that I've been promoting ever since I heard that talk, because I think that people haven't picked up on that enough. And they defined it, and one of the places they published is your book, Judi. I can't remember the title, but they've also published in a journal as well, defining practice as any ongoing, and this isn't their words, but any ongoing, regularly done practice. It has to be a practice that connects one with oneself, others, nature, and beauty.
Hmm.
And I think that's really an important area for all of us to consider and glom onto, because it brings together all these different separate groups and movements. So that to me seems like a really important part of her work. And then also what I don't think I heard in what you were saying, Chris, and adding to what you said, is that she's in her recent work really emphasizing, and I'm quoting her, lifting up and acknowledging very ancient indigenous wisdom, along with newer perspectives about what gives life to systems to create an integrated worldview. So this bringing in of the indigenous in service of earth stewardship is very key to what she's writing about. And speaking of ecological civilizations, and she's building on other people's work. I'm not going to say all the quotes, but I think that focus is really important in what she's doing right now.
Well, and to build on what you're saying, these redefinitions of practice are more inclusive, more accessible, which means more people can join the movement. You know, if I don't have a meditation practice, am I excluded because I don't meditate? Or if I don't have a prayer practice? Well, you know, there's certain communities people cannot be a part of if they don't have that practice. But if you want to make this a movement, you want to be inclusive. And as Debbie has said, that honoring the cultural distinctives and seeking unity within the diversity, allowing for all these different expressions that nurture our souls, inspire us, guide us, so that we are really collective, individually and collectively following our calling. The, go ahead.
And I think if there's a way for us human beings to see our essential humanness and interconnectedness across divisions, and its ground practice is what helps us stay the course. But it doesn't have to be a specific one. And when we define practices in ways that define, like my practice is this, you're different. It's like, it doesn't take us into where you're going, Judi, with creating a really large movement that connects, as Peggy was saying, with democracy as well.
Mhm.
You know, and how inner practice and connection with the earth can coexist with the advancement of technology and complex civilizations is a big question that humanity has to answer, and nobody's, you know, really qualified to answer. So we have to unite.
Yeah, no one strong man leader who has all the answers and only I can do it kind of leadership. Instead, it has to be the collective wisdom that's rooted in indigenous wisdom, in ancient wisdom, and in alignment with science and with, you know, scientific method and the things that we as scholars, those of us who on the call who are scholars, feel are pretty important paths to truth, as well as the inner seeking. Yeah. Oh, Chris, thank you for being with us. It looks like Chris needs to go, but this is recorded and we have another half hour where we're going to, I'm going to offer some different questions, but we don't need them if we want to go on following this emergent conversation. So let me share my screen again one more time for these questions. So again, we're focusing on the Academy of Management and MSR as a division within the Academy, but these questions, I think, apply to any organization or any group of organizations that want to shift the collective consciousness towards something that has better impact on humanity and on the planet as a whole. So I'm thinking about the MSR community, and we don't normally think about MSR as a movement, although I know in my own work and probably a lot of other people, we've talked about the workplace spirituality movement, or we've talked about the conscious leadership movement, or, there's other terms that are part of the domain of MSR. But it's like, what if MSR or any other organization you're a part of, what if we did think about ourselves as a movement, that we're part of some kind of emergent trend, that we're tapped into something that I would say source is guiding us for the benefit of the greater good. So shifting our framework from I'm a member of an organization to I participate in a movement. What would that be like? And if MSR is a movement, how might we describe it? And are others in the Academy of Management, there's other divisions, are they part of the movement as well? And how, if so, how do we use some of these models we've just shared? How would we build alliances, share visions, and so on? And Catherine, can I list these questions and then have you comment, or do you need to say something? Okay, all right. So who outside of the Academy of Management might be a part of this movement? So I named a couple of organizations like the Conscious Leadership Guild, or the Indica Academy and the Indic Wisdom, Inner Knowledge. I'm sorry, Sai, I keep forgetting because you guys changed your name and I haven't memorized the name of your organization. But that is Sai's organization a part of this movement building? And if there is this movement, what could the movement accomplish? How might it make a difference? So those are just some questions I'm throwing out. I will close this out and put those questions in the chat, and then turn it over to Catherine. So let me stop sharing.
Deborah, did you want to say something first? Because that seems important, what you're bringing up.
What we know about movements, and I'll be real quick, is there can be this huge burst of energy, but then the work gets carried out underneath. And so if there is the intentional nurture of community, alternative communities, micro communities, weaving that golden thread, it keeps the movement alive and ready for those moments of outward expression.
So I'm really happy that you brought that up, because it's intriguing. And on my screen, I'm sitting, as you'd say, between Deborah and Judi right now. I suddenly realized, and that's funny, because it's like I'm going to turn back and forth. And I do experience it. And I don't know how many of you experience being with people on a Zoom screen as really being with them. Do you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. And I think it makes a big difference if the conveners of something do, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Then you make it possible for those who are able to experience that to experience it. And there are people who don't experience that, I've found out. But it's interesting. I think that by the conveners feeling like they're together, it opens that window for others. So community, I never thought, Judi, of MSR as a movement, but I experienced it. And I see Jerry next to Judi also as a community from the very first time I met with it in person, because of the way the meetings were held, felt like community. They didn't feel like academic things. And that was what attracted me here when I was sort of, I would say, unceremoniously told to become active by my new boss at a university in the academy. And I'd never been in business schools at all. So I was looking for something that felt like the kind of world I was used to, and that's how I found MSR. So community was very much present, I think, from the earliest days. Thinking of it as a movement, though, and the linking, if we look at Sandra herself, where has she been active is very much in ONE.
Mhm.
And if I consider, and I have, the sessions that have been brought in MSR and then in another group that, because I'm connected with it, I see them all as linked, and that's the International Leadership Association. There is not enough from my, well, now this is like my view, but there is not enough about earth stewardship, about connecting with and holding space for our interdependence with the earth. And I just really hope that if MSR connects more with ONE, that will come in a joint influence on the academy, because I think that plus what Peggy is speaking of is how this influences politics. Our world depends on it. It's not a small question. So I
And
won't go on. I could go on for a long time, but so you asked us to mention what we're doing. So I will just mention, because of my feelings about all this, although I'm, I have long had a PhD. I've mentored people through their dissertations. I'm an emeritus professor, but I just spent 2 years studying as a student and finishing a thesis on this topic, looking at nourishing the ecological self, which is based on deep ecology and Joanna Macy's work, for those who know that. And so I'm bringing that into my work and wanting to speak as a chaplain explicitly, as well as a scholar, and just see what that does to what I can do in the world. So I don't know yet, just starting on that.
thank you, Catherine. That's so emergent for you and integrative of all the different work that you've done before. It just makes so much sense for you to be doing that. And it's an expansion, like Ken Wilber talks. It's transcend and include.
Mhm.
That's what you're doing with your life, and that's beautiful. You and Debbie should connect.
I would love that.
So I put the questions in the chat, but when I copied them from the PowerPoint, they came out in green. I don't know if you can even read them, but let's just see where the conversation wants to go. Actually, let me do this, because we've talked about the founding of MSR, and I'm thinking of you, Jerry, and in terms of movement, you were involved, and I forget the name of the organization, the International Business Association, something like that, where you've created a track on workplace spirituality. And so even before MSR got created, you were kind of building a movement. So if you take on this paradigm of movement, does that fit for you and the path you've walked on?
I think, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, it's interesting because the International Academy of Business Disciplines was started by Abbas Al-Khafaji, and he started the group because at the time, nobody from the Middle East could get anywhere in the Academy of Management. So he basically, when he started that group, there were people from India, there were people from all the Middle Eastern countries, and I thought it was interesting. It's like at the time the academy, and it still is kind of, was the old, the old guys who all went to the big schools and who all had those networks and all that stuff. And so Abbas started this as an opportunity for people who didn't have all that to present somewhere. And so I worked with Abbas on his business research yearbook for you. Unfortunately, Abbas died several years ago, going back to his country, and got killed there. But I worked with him in the business research yearbook, and I said to him, could I start a group on spirituality? At the time, he thought I was kind of nuts, but okay, you want to go start it, go ahead, I guess he felt since I had worked with him on the yearbook, and yeah, we started meeting people back then. So that's when I met Judi. Number of the people who got involved in the academy, we first did it there in that group. And I remember Andre Delbecq came and asked, like, what are you guys doing here? This sounds very interesting. So we started there, and then there was another group, in the academy, the management education division was really helpful. They let us put on PDWs on the subject. It's probably, if it wasn't for them, we might never have gotten a foothold in the academy. So yeah, I think of all the different models that were presented, the idea of making connections seemed to be helpful. And a lot of these connections kind of happened organically. It wasn't like going out of my way to make connections. It's just like meeting people who had similar interests, different places. And so one of those people was David Boji. At the time, David Boji was the editor of the what was it, Journal of Organization. I forget which journal he was doing. Do you remember, Judi? Anyway, David Boji, who was another very interesting person, was involved in the International Academy of Business Disciplines. He had started a group there, again, of people who very interesting group. They were doing critical management, but different critical management than what I think of in the Academy of Management. And so it was a very interesting group. I remember they asked me, very nice people. They asked me to do a talk, and I did a whole talk on how I thought that whole group was the opposite of spirituality. And they told me afterwards it was a great talk. They thought it was one of the best. I thought very interesting. And so, meeting these people and putting together those things is yeah, I guess we were starting a movement. I don't know if I'd call it a move. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Judi, but I think things just kind of happened organically. And then over the years, when I think about where the MSR is right now, one of my concerns is that now that it's a division, how much is MSR buying into are we changing the academy, or are we starting to become more like the academy? It's kind of like a weird thing. There's another group. There's the teaching group, the Org Behavior Teaching Society. Started as a group to be the anti-Academy of Management. I mean, everybody wore T-shirts, everybody wore shorts. I mean, the whole thing was right. And now that group has kind of merged with the Management Education Division. It's almost like if you want to change the academy, just do what you want to do. I mean, like if you don't want to wear a suit, stop wearing a suit. And if you want to wear, if you wear what you want to wear, and eventually you start to change the norms by just doing what you want to do. So if this is making any sense. So I think, the important thing for me anyway is live your truth, do what you feel you ought to do. And then you attract other people who are into similar things. And maybe eventually you start to change the overall academy. But you have to watch out for them not changing you, if that makes any sense. Like the more MSR wants to be a division, and the more they want to get accepted, and the more we want to be like acknowledged as this, you start doing more traditional research as opposed to doing maybe other type research. You start worrying about, well, am I fitting in with the norms of this group enough now that I'm kind of accepted by the group? So that's one thing to watch out for. The other thing I'd say is it is true that 30% of the topics sound like MSR topics. And then you look at the way those topics get interpreted by the various divisions, and most of the divisions, when you look at the papers, they have nothing to do with MSR. It's just, other than, the politics of the academy seems like if you want to get accepted, you use whatever the topic is, and then you title your thing so it seems like it fits in with the topic. And whether or not it does, you know, whether or not it does isn't necessarily the same thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a strategy.
Yeah, I also agree with what Catherine was saying. I think, again, a lot of it has to do with your own personal practice.
Yeah,
And one of the things that's concerning is when people think their practice is the only practice.
right.
And,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think years ago, I came to the conclusion that if you want to change the world, you got to change yourself first.
Absolutely. Yeah, that inner presence, inner practice, authenticity, those are some of the key words that I take away from you and from others in this conversation, that it starts from within, and then the movement is connecting to others who have also done or doing. I mean, we're all works in progress. Our own inner practices, trying to be our authentic selves and not get co-opted by the mainstream. And so this is very, very rich. There's a few people who haven't spoken yet, and I saw Kevin put a note about DEI in the chat. I haven't been able to read it all because I was listening to Jerry. But Kevin, would you like to say more? And I also want to invite Osra and Sunny if they want to say something before we close in about 10 minutes. Just
Sure, I'll
get
just
everybody's
elaborate.
voice in here.
I'll just
Oh.
elaborate a tiny bit on what I put in there. I mean, I think it's interesting to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as belonging, or whatever other fourth word you want to add on, because different groups seem to add different fourth words to that combination. But as I have given a couple talks now on the concept of how to create belonging, and led by a very dearly held personal mission statement that I have, and thinking about the values where they came from, and the inner work that I've had to do to reach a place where my almost everything that I do, I feel, and I get feedback from people that it's intended to create belonging. Doesn't always succeed, but intended to create belonging, and that thinking about that connection and how we're trying to create new connections, and understanding what we know, what we don't know, and how we're going to learn what we need to know to create those additional connections. It's all a part of the personal transformation. And going back to the one diagram that you had, I mean, I think all three of the different parts of organizational change that you had are very important. But for me, I focus much of my effort and much of what I teach about on the personal transformation.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And so glad that you did join MSR. I remember our meeting on one of the doctoral consortiums, and it's like, I saw something in you that I felt like you belonged. Talk about the bee, you belong in our community and you make a difference, and you have. And I'm just so grateful for you joining us and sharing your wisdom. And Deborah needs to leave. And Deborah, again, I want to thank you for saying yes to my invitation and contributing so much wisdom to our conversation. And I hope you'll join us for other things in the future. And of course, you and I have other work to do, my friend.
Yes, we do. Crossing the ontological gap.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. So Asra or Sunny, either of you have anything you want to say, ask, respond to?
I just wanted to add how appreciative I always, whenever I come to MSR gatherings or thoughtful conversations, it always resonates. I'm in the right group, and inclusive and thought-provoking conversations, and just refreshing what I've been doing, how I can validate my work in a bigger streams of works that's out there. People are doing the same kinds of work, right? Sometimes you feel like, as Judi, you always mentions about edge walking, right? You feel like you're in one foot inside, but always feel like you're doing something else as an outlier. I often feel that way in my field. But when I found MSR, that's one thing that assures me that being different, being unique, and bring your own true self to the community of academy is okay, right? More than okay. And I've been doing a lot of experiments in my classes that I'm teaching right now that out of my international business class, instead of teaching cross-cultural competency as more of global cultural differences, I'm doing as interviewing in the street the homelesses, and students are going out and meeting the homeless, and they just presented last week what they have found. I mean, it goes back to what Catherine discussed about connecting with human, right? That how we can be a human, and finding the commonness of human is really where we start to transform anything at all. Because when you see other people as instead of others, and you see them as part of you, the same human, and that's a conversation my students all felt like we're scared to go out and talk to random homeless and who's 30 and who's drug alcoholic and who might be dangerous and mentally unstable. But at the end, they all brought the story of he has a name, he's a Kevin, he has a family, he used to have 5 good jobs and he just lost work, and things didn't work out for him. So it could have been us, any of us in the situations. And from the point that they built that connections, that even the people that they felt most distant, right, that we can still see some connections out of it, then you can change a lot of things with that connections. I mean, that's one thing I'm doing a lot of those types of work, and I'm very happy that often my university's, the provost sent me an email the other day, like, why are you sending students in the street to meet the homeless? Isn't it dangerous? How do you measure the safety for students? Yeah, so a lot of conversation comes out of it, and then they realize that should be the part of the broader educational components of it, right? How we can bring the well-being of humanity and the planet into the work that we do at the individual level and the institutional level and then academy level, right? And then beyond. Yep. Just wanted to add, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sunny. And that's such a great example of connecting to those that we wouldn't normally connect to, but to learn from and maybe to help in some kind of way. But their hearts must open up. There must be a way that must help compassion for many of your students in a way they never might have had otherwise. And yeah, if we teach compassion in business schools, we can change the world.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you. And Sunny, are you still doing that Asian network of AOM members?
Yeah, so we've been doing the monthly, and also we submitted the AOM gathering out of it. And just this month that we try to make a finalize the themes out of the organizing committee. So committee will make a call for each team that they wanted to lead the conversations. And it has been just wonderful that we were able to bring the people together for the topic that they felt so needed in their own field, right? It's needs-based. And then once we are gathering, that we create the safe space that we can voice out what's the concerns at their workplace and how collectively we can address some of those or we can support each other. So this has been really blessed journey for me to be able to hold that space.
Yeah, thank you for
Could
doing
Sunny
that.
just tell us briefly about that? Because we may not all know about what that has been.
Yeah, so under MSR, when I was one of the representative of international community building, the Ben Benito from Philippines, he and I had discussed about creating the groups of Asian scholars diaspora. And especially during the time of COVID, there has been outcry of violences, the physical, mental, psychological violences against the Asian community. And we didn't feel the MSR created any specific space for discussing that pains and also creating some allyship out of it. So we just had a one gathering and about 30, 40 people showed up, and out of it, we created the monthly meeting to support each other. So at the beginning, it was more of understanding what's biases, what's stereotypes against Asian community, how does it work for your academic, how does it affect your academic work? And then it moved into leadership building, also it moved into some mental health issues, and also PhD students, how we can support those students, and also publishing the work in the journals. And so some are very practical, some are very like theoretical. So we covered pretty much whatever members are discussing and saying that we like to have a conversation about. So each month that we have sometimes panel discussion, 3 or 4. Sometimes it's one speaker talking about the work. Sometimes it's just member coming and sharing their experiences themselves. Yeah, so it has been more of organic gatherings based on what people who show up and asking, this is what we need more. Then they become organizing committee member themselves. You think there's need? Okay, go for it, right? Organize one session for us, and we'll do the advertisement. We'll do the bringing the people together, have a conversation. So that has been, in a way, very organic.
Thank you, Sunny. Thank you for all that you're doing. That's important work.
Thank
And yeah, going back to what Kevin was saying about the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion in any movement. One of my mentors and a co-writer of a book I published, Mel Toomey, used to say, he's passed away, and he used to say, anything that you leave out when trying to change a system will come back to bite you. Or anyone, if there's a group or a concept or a department, or so when you don't include somebody who's part of the whole, then that is going to be a problem for your organization. I was talking to some friends in India earlier today, and we were talking about karma a lot. And it's this idea of the more you can include everyone and honor them and be a part of the oneness, then the less karma you will have and create in the world. Yeah.
Judi, it goes back to fairy tales too, right?
No, tell me.
When they leave somebody out, she puts you to sleep for whatever, 100 years or something,
Yeah, we need to wake up, not be asleep.
Yeah, so if you leave them out, that's what happens.
Yeah, that's right. It's part of the archetype of what we have learned with human wisdom, or maybe not learned yet, but need to. Yeah. Well, I want to wrap this up now and thank you all so much for this discussion and for showing up today, and for, more importantly, for the work you're doing out in the world. That if we say there's a movement of evolving consciousness in the world, rather than just saying there's a movement of MSR or a movement of any one thing, even DEI or whatever, it's actually, wait a minute, I'm seeing Asra with her heart, and Asra, you haven't said anything, and I want to give you one more chance if you'd like to say anything in our last couple of minutes.
Thank you, Judi, so much. I am from the practitioner. I am practitioner, so I am offering workshops on spiritual leadership. And also recently I felt deep down in my heart that I had to do something with the community of people who are interested in these things. So I'm hosting webinars on spiritual leadership. I had 2 on Zoom already. So created my webpage. So very happy to join and to be in this community. Very much welcoming. And I remembered that I first met spirituality in the workplace, reading the book edited by you, Judi. So it was when it was in 2015 when I started reading it. I got goosebumps on my, and this led me to do a research of my master thesis on spirituality in the workplace. So very thankful and grateful being here.
We're very thankful and grateful to you, because if our theories and teachings don't ever get out in the world and get applied, what's the point? And you're out there doing it. And so please put your website in the chat So if somebody wants to follow up and learn more about your work or connect to you, they can
It's
do.
in Lithuanian, but yes, I am very happy to put it. Google Translate helps.
And if anyone wants to save the chat, when you go to the chat box, the place where, oops, I closed mine. I want to open it up so I make sure I give you the right description. Oh, and I'll put my website in there too. When you go down below where it says type message here, there should be, oh, I'm not seeing it. There should be a place where you can save the chat. I'll post the chat in the MSR library where I post the link for the video.
Mine shows the 3 dots.
Oh, good.
So
maybe-
look at the very bottom after type message, there's a bunch of little symbols, and on the right are 3 dots. And if you click on that, it says save chat. But maybe that has to do with my setting. I thought it had to do with yours.
I think because mine saves it automatically because I'm recording, that it probably doesn't, I don't need to save the chat, but.
But I think that means that others can do what I just did to save
Yes.
it.
Wonderful. Because there's some wonderful connections here. Thank you, Asra, for your email. So that is another way to build community. You make the one-on-one connections, and then you connect your mission and your projects and your ideas, and support each other's work and amplify each other's work. And then together we can make a bigger difference. And that's what it's all about. So thank you all again.
Today, and for all you've done to create this space over the years where we can do exactly what you described.
Thank you. Thank you. It's like you said about your own work, Catherine, it's a blessing to me. Thank you. Okay. Mwah.
Thank
Love
you.
to you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.